With the latest on the corporate front, all the market trends, expert opinion, and sound business advice. It is your unique window into the business world, direct from the heart of China.
Hello and welcome to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Coming up, we will have half an hour of business news and analysis. On today's show, Chinese Premier Li Qiang addresses the World Economic Forum, highlighting China's contribution to the global economic growth. And China's 2023 economic performance exceeded expectations, with GDP increasing 5.2%. And now let's begin with our top story. Chinese Premier Li Qiang has delivered a speech to the World Economic Forum in Davos, Switzerland earlier this week. He told the audience that China has always been a staunch supporter of multilateralism and made proposals to achieve the goal of rebuilding trust, which goes to the theme of this year's forum. The premier also talked about China's potential for foreign investment, saying that China is open wider and wider for businesses. Our Evangelos Tsipas has more from Davos.
Artificial intelligence, business opportunities with China, and stronger than expected economic growth. Just some of the topics Chinese Premier Li Qiang touched on in his speech before global business and political leaders at the World Economic Forum in Davos. He said the doors are expected to be even wider open for foreign investment.
这些年，我们对世界经济增长贡献率
China's contribution to global economic growth has remained at around 30%. Last year, the Chinese economy rebounded with an estimated growth of around 5.2%, beating the 5% target set at the beginning of the year.
GDP 的增幅在5.2%左右。
Li also touched upon the much-anticipated theme, artificial intelligence. He compared it to a double-edged sword. On the one hand, he said it could close the gap between high and low-income economies and boost opportunity, but he warned it could bring more division. He called for more governance.
China believes that technology must serve the common good of humanity. The same applies to artificial intelligence. It must be people-centered. Human beings must control the machines. AI must be guided in a direction that is conducive to the progress of humanity. So there should be a red line in AI development, a red line that mustn't be crossed.
This is the most high-profile Chinese delegation to attend Davos since 2017, and it was much anticipated by the decision makers and the global economy shapers. Evangelos Tsipas for CGTN from Davos.
For more on this, joined us on the line now are Dr. Qu Qiang, Research Fellow from Beijing Foreign Studies University, and also Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University. So Yan, thank you for joining us. And what are your main takeaways from Premier Li's speech at this year's Davos meeting?
Yeah, good to talk to you, Zhao Yang. So I thought the speech is very powerful and also persuasive. So he talked about how to rebuild trust with very specific 5-point proposals. He provides also very incisive analysis of on China's economic fundamentals and also its strengths. But he also signals, China's determination to continue reform and to open up. So I thought, there's a lot of information to unpack in his speech, and it's also very aspiring in terms of, how to move forward in terms of rebuilding trust, which is the main theme of this year's WEF.
And Professor Qu, actually in his speech, the Premier emphasized the multilateralism. So what is the true multilateralism, do you think?
Well, I think multilateralism means actually you need to be on the equal footing and based on the mutual respect to interact and cooperate with multiple, partners, no matter politically or economically. So China is a real multi-lateral player in the whole world because, number one, we've been treating every country, big or small, with equal footings. Take a look at our, foreign ministers' visit to countries in the last stop of the new year. They visited Africa countries. Actually, China is one of the most important multilateral player in the world right now, especially against the turbulence and all, the full of bias international environment currently.
And Professor Chu, so China's economic growth was 5.2% last year, above the country's target of 5%. So tell us more about China's participation in the global economy.
I think, first of all, I think China has made a very good work, of itself last year. We have achieved more than 5.2% of the economic growth, considering our CPI number is only 0.2. So actually, we have made a pure gain of 5%. Against the current, counterparts, the economy was a similar size. Major economy only made about 2% or 3% of the economic growth of last year. And many of others are even in the negative zone. And even considering the economic stars like Indonesia and India, they made about 6% of the GDP growth of last year. But considering, first of all, their CPI numbers is much higher than China, and also secondly, their GDP per capita is only 1/5 or 1/4 of China. And China, when we had a GDP about $3,000 per capita, our GDP growth are double digital. So considering of that, I think China has made a hell of a job last year. And also last year was, not usual because we have multiple wars happening around the world, choke point on the supply chain, and major recession on international demand in Europe and Latin America. I think against such a turbulent backdrop, I think China have really showed its resilience in the global trade and economy, and also shows that Chinese domestic market are also vibrant and supporting the whole economic fundament.
So China's economic growth was 5.2% last year. So what's the significance of this in terms of China's contribution to the global economy?
Right. So I agree with Professor Qiang. I thought that this growth rate is very robust, right? Especially against the backdrop that the global growth rate is probably going to be at 3% when China is growing at 5.2%. So that is a great achievement, despite all these complex international environments. And it's also domestic challenging reform of the property sector. So against all these challenges, there's still a very bright growth. And not to mention, I think it's not just the quantity that matters. I think the quality of the growth is more important because when you look at this growth, is driven by the new growth engines, so to speak. This is, upgraded manufacturing sector, and also, the green economy, green infrastructure, green technology. Also largely supported by consumer demand growth, which the retail sales have shown the year annual growth is over 7%. So all of these show that this growth has been high quality and more inclusive and also more sustainable. And in terms of the contribution to the global economy, given the size of China's economy and given its growth rate, it has been contributing to 30% of the global growth in the past few years and past decades. So I think it's going to continue to drive the economy, the global economy forward by not only its own growth, but also by opening up to engage in trade, investment, financing, and business communications, technological sharing. So all of this will help to propel the global economy forward by not only providing strong demand, but also helping to provide that stable supply chain for the global economy.
So, Professor Chu, the world economy has been overshadowed by major geopolitical conflicts that we've been seeing for the past year. So how difficult is it to rebuild the trust to, boost the world economy among the current global backdrop?
Well, I think this is very, very difficult. I don't think there is a short wrap-up for the Ukraine crisis and also for the Gaza crisis. And I think it's going to be with us for, even if it's been ending, the major conflict's been ending in the current 3 to 6 months, but I think the whole crisis will be haunting the whole region in the next very, very long times. As well as we've been seeing the crisis in the Red Sea. It's also an extended crisis out of the Gaza Strip. And it's going to be with at least for half to 1 year. So that's not an easy job to solve them.
And difficult global circumstances. So Yan, the Chinese premier, made a few suggestions for the world community to rebuild the trust and enhance the cooperation in the economic field. So could you elaborate more on that?
Right. So Premier Li Qiang emphasized 5 points. So he talked about strengthening macroeconomic policy cooperations between different countries. So I think even though he didn't criticize specific countries, but it's clear that, last year, ECB and the Fed's interest hikes without, sort of necessary coordination in this macro policy has put many developing countries in debt distress. So I think to rebuild trust, first, what you need to have is really to think about your policy implications to the rest of the world and try to coordinate your macroeconomic policies. And the second point that he pointed out is we need to strengthen the international industrial specialization and try to really collaborate to keep the global supply chain stable instead of, again, having the kinds of friendshoring, nearshoring to keep certain countries out of the supply chain or try to cut them off the supply chain. That is not going to be conducive, right, to rebuild trust. And the third point that he emphasized is international exchanges and cooperation on science and technology. Again, I think this is a pretty strong criticism against this idea of de-risking, right, trying to contain another country's growth by banning technology assets. And what he emphasized here is, again, science technology can be helpful for the global community if we are able to work together and cooperate on these fronts. And the fourth point that he talked about is we need to cooperate on green development. And so that goes without saying. I think climate change is a global challenge that requires global solutions. If each country just put fingers at each other, that's not going to get us very far. And last but not the least, Li Qiang also emphasized North-South and South-South cooperation to build an inclusive world economy. So I think that goes without saying. If you have this kind of block confrontation and you want to build, just sort of little blocks to trade with each other or invest within each other without having the broader connection, the true practice of multilateralism, then it's very difficult to build trust because, you would have that kinds of a confrontational approach between different blocks. So those are the 5 important points. And I think eventually what he argued is that to rebuild trust, we need to have the shared aspiration for a better future for humanity. So I think that is really the key message in his speech.
And Professor Xu, so one key message from Premier Li was China continues to open up and China welcomes the foreign investment. He cited many investment examples in China with return above 9%, which is very impressive given the complexity of the global market. So how do you explain that?
Well, China, everybody, if you follow Chinese story in the past 40 years, you will know China is one of the fastest growing economy in the whole world and created a miracle about modernization and industrialization. And I think Chinese people are very humble and very clear about how we achieve that. And I think one of the most important reasons, besides our own effort, is we opened up our gate to the rest of the world. Internationalization and also the opening up has been, doing China a great, benefit. It brought us, international reach, international experience, global market, and advanced technologies and capitals. So Chinese people are fully aware of that, and we're going to make a commitment to continue with that, endeavor. So, and I think China right now has the largest manufacturing, capacity around the world. We're the world factory. So that structure decided China is going to open up to the rest of the world continuously. Similar story happened with Germany, with South Korea, with Japan. Those countries are all trade surplusers because they are also supplying the capacity to all over the world. So they've made trade surpluses continuous in the past few decades. So China have followed a similar trend, a similar path like them as well. So it decided China will continue to work as a trader, like a globalization participant to the rest of the world. And also, if you follow Chinese policy making, China has been granting, unilaterally the visa-free policies to many other countries. This is unprecedented, and as well as China has been creating a much more clearer, black and white list for the foreign capital entry. China has released many of the controls on the threshold on manufacturing sectors, service sectors, as well as the capital sectors. These are all the signatures are showing Chinese government's willingness to welcome and embrace the international market and international, corporations. And you can count on that.
So, Yan, Premier Li also has been talking about the potential for China's green development, and also he talked about the red line for artificial intelligence. And he said there has to be a common red line established and recognized by the stakeholders for the safe AI development. So, how do you explain that? And what should the international community do on the AI governance, do you think?
Right. So first, I think for green development, that is really the future. That is not only the new engine of growth for China and also for all the world, but it's also really what makes growth more sustainable. And green development, it's very overarching strategy, and under which we'll find, developments of new technologies, new infrastructure, new transportation, new energies, and also new lifestyle. So demand also plays a very significant role in that kind of green development. So I think, again, this is really the strategy going forward, and this is really where the growth engine is going to be. Now, AI, on the other hand, it's also a new growth engine. It's a very powerful, very potent technology. But before we can really fully utilize these kinds of technology, we need to make sure, like Premier Li Qiang emphasized, to make sure this technology is being well governed by sound regulations and policies. And so what Premier Li warned against is kinds of camp-based division or confrontation, in his words. In other words, we don't want to use AI as a weapon to confront against other countries. And we also want to make sure that any of the fruits of technologies should be shared in an inclusive manner. So as he pointed out, AI should not just benefit a small group of people, but it should benefit the overwhelming majority of mankind. And so I think what he's emphasized here are, again, two. One is we need to make sure that AI is being well regulated. And second is it needs to be shared in an inclusive manner.
Well regulated and share. So we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, and also Qu Qiang, Research Fellow from Beijing Foreign Studies University. And after a short break, we'll take a look at China's economic performance in the year 2023. Stay with us.
Deep Dive, a podcast of CGTN Radio. We go beyond headlines with reporters from around the world. Search for Deep Dive on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Take a deep dive into the news every week. Hear our conversations.
You're listening to Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. China has released the economic figure for 2023. China's GDP grew by 5.2%, and many major sectors are in an upward trend. Industrial output grew by 4.6%, and equipment manufacturing grew even faster and registered a 6.8% rise. And meanwhile, retail sales also registered strong upward momentum, rising by 7.2%. So, Professor Qu, actually, China's 5.2% GDP growth was mainly in line with the market expectations. But what does it say about, the overall economic landscape in China?
5.2% of the economic growth is a solid gain because China has a low inflation. And also, given China is already the number 2 GDP in the whole world, economy in the whole world, it's very, very difficult to achieve such a high-speed growth, number one, against such a turbulent background of the whole globalization. Second, at such a sheer amount of, size of its economy, because everybody knows when your economy is in a small size, it's easy to grow at a faster speed. But when your economy is really large, like European Union, like in America, usually it's very, very hard to grow as fast as before, because when your GDP is like 100 million US dollar, it's easy to grow like 1%. It's just 1 million, right? But if your GDP size is 1 trillion US dollar, and considering each 1% of the GDP growth will be much harder than a smaller economy. So China has made it, especially against such a hard time of the globalization. So it shows that Chinese economy is resilient. Because last year China has really made a very successful, gear shifting. Everybody are talking about China's new export trail, EV, electric power equipment, as well as the solar panels and windmills and etc. And also China is exporting the digital devices, something with high tech. So this showed China has right now been seizing certain of the commanding height in the world economy as well as in the export. And also China, I think the reason why it's resilient in its economy is not only about its export, and they've been successful managing to climb up the value chain in the technology, but also I think China's been showing domestic market is vibrant. Since China's reopening from the pandemic, many sectors have been showing vitality, for example, in tourism. Everybody are talking about, tourism in China. Many hot cities, hot words are getting trending, from the Zibo to Changsha to Chongqing, and now it's Harbin. It's not only been hot in China, but also been trending words in international social media. And retailing businesses are coming back as well. I paid many visits to the shopping malls, wholesale market, and the retailing markets. I talked to the shopkeepers by myself. They've been telling me that the business is back. They've been higher hands. There are more orders coming in, especially it's approaching the Spring Festival. So I think the climate and sentiment of the economy domestically is absolutely getting warmer. And if you can read from the Statistics Bureau's number, both of the CPI, both of the job numbers are getting better and better in the Q4. So I think the sign is good, and Chinese economy is still stably gaining momentum.
So what do you think about China's economy? And despite the challenges posed by a complex external environment, how can China's manufacturing sector sustain its growth while climbing the global value chain?
Right. So I think I agree with what Professor Qi mentioned earlier. I think what is really important is not only the relatively high speed of growth compared to the rest of the world, but really in terms of the new growth engine. So the real estate sector is no longer really what drives the economic forward, but rather the advanced manufacturing, like what he mentioned, digital devices or wind turbines or solar panels or new energy vehicles and lithium-ion batteries. All of these are very high value added and advanced kinds of manufacturing. So to answer your question, when we look at the numbers, last year the industrial value added has grown by 4.6%, and that is largely due to some upgrading in the supply chain, and that again thanks to a lot of high tech sector investments. When you look at the investment numbers for the high tech sector, it has gone up way more than other. The overall investment growth. So I think that's a sign. The high-tech growth investment actually rose by 10.3% when we have the total investment increase by 3%. So what that shows is that, with all these investments, with all these financing that goes from the real estate sector, but now going into the manufacturing sector, we're going to see a continued growth with, the manufacturing sector. And the demand side also is very robust. It comes from both internal markets, right? So, Chinese consumers love to drive new energy vehicles. And there's also growing external demand for China's high quality, low cost vehicles, especially in, Southeast Asia, Australia, and in EU. So, China is able to continue to invest in R&D, in advanced manufacturing, and leverage on its decades of manufacturing capacity and continue to upgrade its value chain and also increase the investments, increase the internal and external demand. So all of these are really important ingredients for the sectors to continue to grow and continue to upgrade.
So Yan, China is now paying much attention to the digital economy, green economy development. So how do you think can China effectively support and promote technological innovation in some key areas?
Right. So I think it takes at least 3 very important factors. For one is we need to have the continued active role of the government. So the central government has been providing finance, right, the guided investment funds to go into, for example, semiconductor sector to continue to boost the investment, research development, and manufacturing of these high-tech products. And second, I think what is important is to really have the competitive environment and to have the kinds of entrepreneurship that continue to innovate. So in China, for example, the EV industry is very competitive. There's so many businesses are competing and innovating and promoting, 107 models of EVs in China, ranging from the low cost, low level to the high cost, high end kinds of vehicles. So these kinds of entrepreneurship and the innovation are really important. And finally, of course, we need to have a very large market with consumers that are eager to embrace these new technologies, new products. And so I think all of these are very important. And that's also, why China's technological innovations, advanced manufacturing, and all of these new growth engines have been growing so rapidly.
And yeah, so what are some of the new consumption trends do you see for this year?
Right. So what I'm seeing is there has been really significant growth in consumption of services. When you look at the retail goods consumption, it has grown by 7.2% in 2023. But when you look at the retail sales of services, that has grew by 20%. So more than double the increase in the retail sales of goods. So what that means is, people really enjoy healthcare, enjoy tourism, as Professor Xu mentioned. They enjoy entertainment, education, and so on and so forth. So I think this service sector is really full of potential, and we still have a lot of potential to invest in the sector.
So there is a lot of potential for this year's economic development, right? So we're speaking with Yan Liang, Professor of Economics, Willamette University, Qu Qiang, Research Fellow from Beijing Foreign Studies University. And that's all the time we have for this edition of Biz Today. I'm Zhao Yang in Beijing. Thank you so much for listening.